in my email. I love it. It's now going to be my computer wallpaper. So I appreciate it. And thank you, Fred, for the opportunity here, especially to work with PL on the go. And if you haven't seen anything else, I suggest it. I did sit in on a webinar yesterday about when life gives you lemons, and it was really productive. I think it was very helpful. So oops, there we go. So I'm Chris Cooper. I teach high school English at Valhalla High School. This is our middle high school building. There's my classroom right there. So kind of missing it now, haven't been there in a while. This whole experience has been, as a student told me, it's surreal. It's school, but it's not. It's been a challenge for everybody. So I guess Valhalla was in that second wave of schools in Westchester that started to close because we're, central Westchester. I feel like it moved south to north. So I think the writing was on the wall, and we had enough time to at least think about, what are we going to do? What's this going to look like? And our faculty played a big role in producing a framework and how this would work. And so luckily our administrators were understanding and wanted some teacher input. So a lot of what we're doing now has been produced by teachers. So that Friday, before we officially closed, before we even knew we were closing for sure, I canceled all my tests, I canceled all my lessons, I got the laptop cart. I was playing around with Screencast. I taught students how to log into Google Meet just to make sure everybody was on that same page. And I think I hit the ground running with the remote learning. That first week we were off, my wife was still working. I had 3 kids. I had them set in certain places. I felt like I was running. I was sprinting out of the gates. And I said, wow, I could do this. I can definitely do this. And at this point, I'm tired. It's tougher than I thought. I could not maintain the sprint. And I've been noticing too that my colleagues, some of whom started slow, said, let's take it easy. I like to compare them to George Harrison, because if you look at the later Beatles stuff, he's the star. He's producing the best stuff. So I wish I was more like George Harrison and less like McCartney, at this point. So I guess what motivated me to do this was I attended a webinar he's a renowned speaker in education. And I can't say the webinar was bad. It was good, but I looked at this and I said, well, if this is what a national guru is showing us that he does, I think it's helpful for us to say, this is what we're doing, because I didn't think there was, I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe my expectations were too high for this man, but I said, well, if a national guru is showing us this, then we've got to be doing something right, because it does look like what the rest of what we're doing is it looks like what we're doing. And a lot of the conversations I've had have stemmed around, I feel like I got nothing done, it's not working out. And I really started to take it all in and say, no, it really is. There's really not much more you can do. So let's have a conversation and focus on what we're doing well, and accept the fact that, things might not work, and that's okay. Somebody said to me the other day, how could we be doing this wrong? We've never done it before. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I wanted to show you this clip. This is a video that went viral a few years ago. I'm sure once you see it, you all remember it. It's a short clip, but I think you'll enjoy it.
No, I would argue that this is a triumph of democracy. Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
The region.
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year because of North Korea's behavior. Most recently, the use of VX gas in the airport in Malaysia that indicates that North Korea really doesn't follow global norms.
Raise your hand if you remember that clip. I guarantee, raise your hand if you remember that clip, if you actually remembered what he was talking about in this broadcast. Nobody, right? Nobody remembers that. Everybody remembers the kids walking in and his wife scrambling desperately to try to fix everything. And this man became like a worldwide sensation. People loved him for it. And I was reminded of this because my first week during remote teaching, that happened, or something similar happened, where my 3-year-old wandered in, interrupted the session, and I was kind of embarrassed, or thought, who has time for this? And she heard, I had a student on there named Ava. She heard the name Ava, thought it was a friend of hers, and climbed on my lap trying to find Ava. And when I pointed out, no, it's not your friend Ava, it's this Ava, she said, well, I don't like her, and left. And I said, so I apologized profusely. But if we look at this clip, we see the professor, he's definitely embarrassed and frustrated, but nobody faulted him for that. Everybody thought it was delightful. Everybody loved that. And I got an email from a student right after this. I'm going to read it to you in case you can't see it. Dear Mr. Cooper, this is a little random, but I just wanted to reach out and thank you for what you have been doing. It is so nice to have some structure in our days and to have someone who is telling us things in advance and giving us time to complete all of our work. I miss being in your classroom, but the video call was still very helpful. If we had class, I would be telling you this in person, but I obviously can't, so I guess email is the next best thing. Your daughter was super cute. It was nice to be able to laugh when we were all pretty stressed out. Thank you again for being super understanding. And it's not, I didn't expect an email like this, but the two things that stood out to me, structure and stressed out. So looking back, the idea of, many of us have probably had that if we have small children or even, pets who like to jump on screen when we're on screen. It's actually it diffuses the stressful situation. And I thought about this and said, you know what, that's not the worst that could happen. It's not terrible. And it's just something we need to roll with. And the fact that I feel sometimes like I get off of these Google Meets, I complete these lessons, I accept work, I'm thinking I'm doing it all wrong. That idea that we're providing structure is really important. And I think that's what really matters. So I think I'd like to move forward today and hear from some of you at some point at the end of this presentation. What is it you're doing to provide structure, and why is it good enough? So let's just imagine for a minute, remote teaching is puppy dogs, rainbows, and ice cream. Everything's fantastic. What does your ideal look like? If you want to type that out in the chat, if you want to, if you don't want to, you don't have to, but in your head, what is the best possible remote teaching experience on any given day? And I'm trying to look for the chat.
So Chris, if you go up to the top, right, I think since you're sharing, you should have like maybe an options button. Does something come up on the top that says options, or on the bottom?
It sure does, yes, got it.
Okay, and you should be able to open the chat that way. And then if anybody wants to share some of their thoughts about what ideal remote teaching would look like, you can pop it right into the chat box, hit return or enter, and it'll pop up for everyone to see.
If your remote teaching is the ideal, absolutely include that. So we've got students, good students engaged in a lesson, all participating in Google Meet and discussion, seeing all of their faces enthusiastic and excited. Yeah, I'd love that. Building on relationships with students, giving them a voice. Absolutely. Good. Yeah, content, I agree. Content is important, but secondary. Communicating, solving a problem, feeling accomplished. Um, yeah, I do. I'm not one to say, oh, great to see everybody every day, but it really is. Healthy didactic relationship, communicating, keeping a relationship, absolutely. Ideal, probably students exercising choice, absolutely. That's on my wish list, Joe. Probably students exercising choice and what they learn about to balance our curricular standards and expectations, students being active digitally, students reaching out to me when they need me, stress or fear or anxiety, yeah. Um, and I'm looking at some of these ideals, and what I'm starting to realize too is that some of your ideals are actually, oops, some of our ideals are actually happening, which is good. Um, Maybe not 100%, but they are. Team meetings, sharing thoughts and new ideas. What's working, what's not. That's great. That's what we're here for today. So the second question I have is, and this is the trap I fell into. I had this ideal in my head and then had to re-examine, what's my purpose really? Why am I doing this remote learning? What's the end game? Because my Regents exams have been canceled. My AP exam is now pared down to a single 40-minute essay. The majority of my English classes don't have that test in the end. So in the one point, I'm being, I've got this weight lifted off my shoulders. Like, I don't have to worry about this anymore. That it's some breathing room here. But at the same time, well, without having to prepare for these and get ready and make sure that they can pass these tests, what is my real purpose? How do I separate that ideal from what I'm really supposed to be doing here? So if you want to shout it out in the chat, let what you think is the purpose of remote teaching for you. Granted, I teach high school English. I think it's a different set of challenges and benefits as someone teaching math or a foreign language or science or elementary school. And so what I'm seeing from you, keeping a line of communication open, supporting students during this time, connection. Fred, you've shifted your thinking around this. Now I see remote learning as about the connections and relationships. Everything else is secondary. Continued contact, yeah. Giving them an opportunity to see their classmates and teachers, providing them with familiarity. You mentioned providing a level of structure and checking in with each other, being flexible to changing needs. Absolutely. Honesty, some sense of normalcy, I'm seeing. Absolutely. I think, and this is really a feel-good moment for me, that we're on the same page. This idea that we're providing structure, and what I'm hearing is that although the content is important, the structure, the communication, and the stress reduction and the sense of normalcy is important. I keep telling them I can't wait to get back to see you again before the end of the year. I don't know what the likelihood of that really is at this point. But yeah, absolutely, sharing humor and just being silly. And I think that structure and normalcy is what's important. And that's kind of how I tell myself, okay, it's not ideal. This is definitely, this is not the ice cream and the rainbows that we all wanted, but it definitely is the best we can do. So what I'd like to share with you now is what I did with the structure. And not everybody does this. I think there are different ways of doing this, but I've tried to organize it. This is what my calendar, they would have received this. So this was last week's calendar. They received this calendar on Friday, the 17th. So they knew what was coming up. And our framework 2.0 is set up so that each subject area or the core subject areas get 5 hours of synchronous learning per week. With 5 courses I teach, I thought of doing, an hour a piece, but then I figured a little more consistency is the best we can do. So I've given them this coded Google Doc. It's color coded, so all they need to know is, well, what period do I normally have Mr. Cooper? I have him second period. That's yellow, so I know when I'm meeting, and I have an idea of what's happening in class that day. Google Meet, Google Classroom, Google Docs has been my go-to. I think at this point, most people in my school are using it to some extent for the sake of consistency. I know Zoom is great, but I believe we're all on Meet simply for the convenience of students not having to switch platforms. So my first idea was, I'm providing structure. All right, let's make this as simple as possible. So now all they need to do is look at it and say, okay, this is when we're meeting. I don't require them to attend. I think nobody requires them to attend these Google Meets. And in fact, Fred, you tweeted out this morning that blog by, I think it was Peter DeWitt, 6 reasons why students aren't showing up to online learning. And I'll get more into that later. But I think one of the things he mentioned is that we're not requiring it. And I'm thinking to myself, if I had an 8 o'clock meeting that I didn't have to go to right now, would I be there all the time? And the answer is I don't know. So I keep in my mind, well, think of my situation. How are the students' situations similar? So I've kind of learned to disconnect myself from that, well, where was this student? Instead of saying, well, where were you? It was more, I haven't seen you. What can I do for you? How can I help you? And if you can't make it, if a student can't make it, I'll reach out. So now I just want to share a few things I've been doing that seems to be working from my perspective here. I found that my text selection I've been pretty happy with. I've been focusing mostly on shorter pieces. So one of the things I started with some of my classes were some Hemingway short stories. And I set up a Google Doc to kind of foster a discussion, or at least have the students bring something to the table, where this was for a story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro by Ernest Hemingway. I've created a chart that I constantly reproduce and just change the title on it. And they find their name. In the takeaway section, they write down anything they want. Questions, observations about the piece, connections they've made, quotations, anything that stood out to them. I encourage them to comment on each other's, but at any given time, I'll check in and see where they are, and you'll see where I made some comments. One student mentions at the end, there's the sound of a hyena in the distance, and it's described as human-like, and he wanted to know why. So I linked a YouTube video on what hyenas sound like. Just made some comments there. Here's from the same assignment. I try to jump in and ask questions. And the reason I do this, and I'll get to this again in a minute too, the students online aren't always willing to speak out loud, or uncomfortable with it, and don't quite know how to join the conversation. So I found this as a jumping off point. And what I'm trying to do here is give the students a sense of structure, while at the same time not dictating to them, this is what you should be getting out of the short story. What I am finding too So I'm also doing the Catcher in the Rye. I moved to Catcher in the Rye after this one. And I I think that's working well because the chapters are episodic. So it's almost like reading a series of short stories with the same narrator. And I also think those themes of alienation and isolation and distance are really resonating with them more so now, given our situation. So I'm pleased with that. Um, so that's good. I just, it's an opportunity for them to share something. So go ahead, use it if you feel like it. Um, and I was having at one point a very high attendance rate to some of the courses. This was my AP class on Friday, and it was the lowest attendance I had on record. There are 21 students in the class, one of whom is a transfer student who joined the class 3 days before we shut down for good, or for the long haul. But I had 13 there that day out of 21. I was kind of like, not great, but people are attending. And right now we're doing a humor unit. They'd read some David Sedaris and Sarah Vowell, watched some stand-up comedy during these remote sessions. So I chose the humor unit now because it is a great way to de-stress and be silly and take a look at why are we laughing at this. And one of the best things I found was I was struggling with how do I get kids to talk instead of the same 3 kids who volunteer every time. And I actually joined one of the coffee and conversation meetings, I think 8:30 every day on PL on the Go. And the moderator there asked a question, somebody would answer, and then pass it to another person. You'd look to see who was there and say, okay, I want to hear from this person. And this is the first day I did that. I did this class right after I had this, I joined this, and I thought just from listening to other people, I got kids to speak. I think everybody on here got a chance to bring something to the table that day. So that was great. What I am noticing now, though, is it is getting stale. So part of what I'm hoping here today is we get an idea of how to make it a little fresh. I think everybody's tired of the remote learning. I think there was a fear, well, is this the way things are going to go? And I don't think so. I think this is great for now. If it's much longer, we will start to rethink how we do it. But what can we do to make things fresh? So I sent out a survey to all of my students, just asking them about how the whole experience is going. Only 55 kids responded by the time I put this all together. So I also found out after the fact that the students were, I was asking specifically about my classes. They thought I was asking about the whole thing. So we'll keep that in mind. Generally, it seems the workload's been fair. I looked at this, okay, maybe I'm giving a little more than I should be. So I'm going to start reaching out to kids and saying, well, what do you think is fair? But I'll get to that again in a minute. Most students think it's either the workload, the difficulty hasn't been too bad. So I really shouldn't be looking at who sent these, but I saw who thinks it's a little difficult. Okay, those are students I can reach out to now and say, what can I do to help? So yeah, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, what I'm asking of them, for the most part, 76% of the kids responded saying it's okay. So that made me feel a little better about how I'm doing things. How helpful has it been? This got me a little bit. I was like, ooh, 9 kids didn't think it was that helpful. Interestingly enough, a few of them are students who I hadn't seen online. Some of them I've seen all the time. So, it's really hard to say. my favorite is the accessibility via email, because yeah, I know students who haven't emailed me yet have said that I've been outstanding. I think that was the level 5 was outstanding. Okay, nobody's saying it's bad though, so that's good. So I'm thinking to myself, all right, I leave these sessions feeling like nothing's been accomplished, but the message I'm getting is that overall, the strengths of what we're doing is definitely, they're outweighing the weaknesses. My instructions are clear. Okay. And that was more for feedback. The more important part is when I ask people or ask students to respond with any other suggestions or to explain themselves. And this is just a snapshot of some of them. And what I'm noticing, the repeat issue is that my workload's not a problem, but the buildup of everything every day has become too much. Workload for English has been reasonable, but all of the work I get for all my classes combined is way too much. They want interdisciplinary communication a little more. Easier said than done, right? But they're pointing this out. At the same time, I'm looking at this and saying these are similar to what we're doing, similar issues we're having when we're in school, right? Yeah, Mr. Cooper, I know you only assigned a 10-page short story, but all the classes combined, there was a lot to do last night. So, okay. And this one really stuck out to me. I'm struggling with maintaining the motivation. And my answer to that student is I hear you. You know, this at 6 weeks, 7 weeks, I think time has vanished. I don't know what day it is or what time it is, but yeah, that it's tough. And I think it's helpful to know that they're struggling as much as we are, and they're looking for guidance. And it all came down to that idea of providing structure and providing relief and a sense of normalcy. So to recap, generally, what am I pleased with? I'm happy with my structure. The fact that I am trying to provide them structure, I seem to be succeeding. This less is more attitude. I have this flexibility with my curriculum now, where I don't feel the need to get all of this done so they can move on next year. So I'm interested to see what teachers in other disciplines are feeling. I'm happy with my text selection, and I'm definitely happy with the feedback my students are giving me. But I do have a wish list. I'd love to incorporate more student choice. I'd love to create more screencasts. I'd love these online class discussions to be more meaningful. I'd love to be able to be there 24/7 to really guide them through the writing process. You know, I'm not assigning major writing pieces anymore. I'm assigning shorter things and struggling with how do I teach the writing process effectively. I want to do more blogging. I want to do more vlogging, and I wish we had more time. I really do. So I'm done. That's my speech, I guess. So now I want to hear your thoughts and your ideas. What's working for you? What can I do that you're doing? I don't know, Fred, if you want to have them type in chat or in the Google Doc, or even if people want to speak. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah. So Chris, one thing that if you want to be able to see everybody on the screen, if you want to stop sharing, right,
Yeah.
that'll allow us to go back to the mode where everybody's up, and then we can kind of perfect. There you go. And now it just kind of puts like the chat back on the side, and maybe it's a little easier to manipulate. One thing that we can do, if we have just a really great group here, and so one thing that you can do if you've got a question for Chris, if you go into the participants tab, the manage participants button, and hit that so you can see everybody's name. You should also see the option under there to raise your hand, right? So one of the buttons or things you should be able to click on should be to raise a hand. And so if you have a question for Chris, and you hit that, I'll be able to see, let's just make sure it works. Joe, I know you're here. If you just hit that, the raise hand, I just want to say, okay, great. So now when I look at my screen, Joe's hand is raised, right? And so I can see that. And then two, if you want, if your camera's up, you can also just raise your hand as well, right? And either one of those will work. And so I can refer to people by his names. Thanks, Karen. I'm glad that you got that, right? So you're good. And I don't know, it says S. Rosenstrach, right? I don't know the first name. So you're muted now. So you have a question though for Chris? Yeah,
Comment, really.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I'm not that good technologically. It's even hard for me to get into Zoom. I've mostly been doing videos for my class. And, this is new to all of us, including me. I'm kind of BC before computers. I'm trying to stay positive like everybody. Basically, I'm trying to concentrate on what I can do. The videos I've been doing have just been handing in ideas and trying to entertain as well and making it fun for the kind of children that I help my teacher to teach. Because my guys really can't talk, only a few words. So I try to make it more entertaining.
Yeah.
The mistakes made, even kids running into the room. I did one segment and I misunderstood a coworker on a celery experiment. And I didn't do it right because I misunderstood her. And I don't know, let's just saying, we're all trying our best. I'm good in science. I'm a member of the Museum of Natural History. I'm a paleontologist with the Museum of Natural History. So I was even actually able to use that and provide a little science.
That's great.
Well, you're doing the celery experiment incorrectly. It is a learning experience. I mean, they can see what happens if something's missed. And
Yeah.
What grade are your students?
Elementary.
Elementary school. Yeah, that's a whole different ball game right there. I have 2 elementary age students, and I see how difficult that is for the teachers. But I think you're doing what you can. How advanced are we going to get with the technology? I feel like my own kids are better at that stuff than I am. So really, yeah, you've just, that's what I was hoping to hear. You've focused on your positives and what's working and what you're doing. And believe me, the kids appreciate it. The students really appreciate it.
I hope so.
So other questions? Thanks so much. Other questions for Chris? Chris says
that something you're doing that works.
And and if I see your hand raised, I see H. Horwitz. And so if you don't mind coming on and just sharing your name, where you teach and what your role is, that would be awesome.
Hi, my name is Heidi Horwitz. I teach at Valhalla High School with Chris Cooper and some more of my colleagues. Hello. One thing that I found that I've been doing that's been working, my students are very, very sleepy in the morning, as most high schoolers are. So I have them first period. So I kind of, after the announcements, after the pledge, I kind of ease them into their day, and we just chat for a few minutes, about a show we've watched or a book we're reading or what are they doing in their spare time. And I found that starting my Google Meets with my students like that has really kind of eased them in. They feel the sense of normalcy that they would in the classroom. It feels familiar. We were talking about basketball and Netflix yesterday, and they were giving me suggestions, and we were talking about shows, and it was just kind of a nice way to ease them into whatever we were doing, but it felt normal for us.
I've written that down because I actually have not done that. So that seems like a no-brainer to me. Like, I should be doing that.
Well, I want to talk to you later about your structure, because that's fabulous. So thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
That should be a no-brainer to me. So thank you.
I know some people are using those blocks as, okay, here's a 2-hour block of whatever subject area, and keeping kind of open lines of communication and just having assignments to do during that time, and which I think also is a good move. You know, I think it's a lot to do with comfort level. So, you know, the structure, I don't think the structure has to look the same for all of us, but I'm happy to share that with you.
Chris, I have a question about what, so like eventually at some point, we will be back in our schools, right? And so it may be this year, it may not be, right? But at some point, yes, right? So like those institutional kind of normalcies will come back, and things may be a little bit different, you know, depending on what reentry looks like, but we'll eventually get back to elements of school as we know it. And so one of the things I'm wondering, you know, after now, right, like we're getting towards the 6.5 week mark, are there elements that you see like transitioning over, right? So when we go back and things are kind of normal, are there some elements of the virtual and remote world that you'd like to keep active, maybe not to the same extent, but that you see and your students see have been a valuable way to do some element of the work that you do? Is there anything that you think like, wow, even when we go back, I'd like to still do this?
Absolutely. In particular, I learned very quickly how to do a QuickTime screencast and put it in OneDrive and share it. So I've done a few of those. My initial plan was to do one per class per week. That hasn't held up as much as I want, but something like that I would definitely incorporate, because I do give a lot of background, make some commentary. One thing I've been doing, and I haven't done it with every chapter, but for some of The Catcher in the Rye, I've been reading those aloud and recording them, putting those out there, because I can't find audio that exists that I'm particularly pleased with. I think, and I do have to give credit to two of our Valhalla middle high school champions here, Amy Fox and John Chapton, because they've been at the forefront of showing us how to do these things. So something like that. I do want to keep the Google Meet links in my classrooms for occasions where, okay, if a student needs help, can't get to my classroom during a particular time, or wants to talk if they're out sick that day, something, keep that line of communication open, so they can hop on, and I can do some one-on-one help that way. Little things like that I'm finding particularly helpful. And the document where I had them all post their takeaways in the same place, that's an assignment that translates well. That doesn't need to be online exclusive. That said, I don't want to teach like this every day, because it's not ideal. I would argue that 40 minutes 5 times a week isn't ideal either, but it's definitely a familiar format, and I think a lot more productive than this. But we're doing the best we can. But yeah, I think we can take things that use every day.
Thanks. Other questions or ideas for Chris? Things you want to share that have worked well for you? As you've gone through your own personal teaching or leading, depending on what your role is?
Hi, my name is Paul Vespo. I'm a school psychologist, and I'm just interested in learning from you all as educators and teachers, what you're doing in your classrooms. What are your thoughts about kids? I work at Lincoln Hall, which is, a detention center, of course, using like real life movies that are like applicable to like 21st century skills. Because that's the direction we're moving in right now, right? With online learning, like more practical learning, not teaching to just Common Core standards. Not that that's necessarily bad, but that's the direction we're taking. What do you all think of like real life movies or like things that are more applicable to 21st century skills that my students that are, you know, in the detention center, or really any students could learn.
It'll work.
I mean, the best part about this is kids who don't have access to some of the online streaming things. I can play it and show things on Netflix or Disney Plus. In fact, when I start satire with my my AP class, I plan to stream and have a Google Meet where we'll watch a Simpsons episode, which I think the real life applications are really worthwhile in a lot of ways. A very layered show. And, you know, Mr. Ferraro said before, ideally incorporating student choice. Maybe that's something to go along with what we've chosen to teach. Give them a choice. You have a platform. You might have access to this. If you don't, we'll work something out. But what are some movies we can put on a list, or topics or themes where they could search for a show or a film that relates to that?
Definitely. Yeah. No, I think that's the direction we're all going to have to take, right? More, you know, applicable and realistic type of teaching. You know what I mean? Just because of it's just as the direction it's going to be going, probably.
I mean, we've been through Act 1 of every zombie apocalypse movie. Like that's Act 1 is over. We're on Act 2. So that I watched a film. I wouldn't recommend it to the students. It was pretty gruesome. It was on Netflix. It was called The Platform, and it's this dystopian future where it's a prison where you have 2 prisoners on each level, and there's a big platform of food that moves down. So the people at the top get to gorge themselves, while the people at the bottom are starving and fighting for food. And I said, you know, it definitely, the social commentary had the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the side of the head. But I thought about that now. I said, well, that's why this is so popular on Netflix right now, because of this, the current state of affairs, and what are things like for people who have everything, and what are things like for people who don't. So I think that in itself, things like that lend themselves to their lives as they're living it now.
Definitely. Thank you.
Other questions or ideas for Chris? And I posted, Chris had mentioned Peter DeWitt's blog about 6 reasons why kids aren't showing up for remote learning. And I posted that link in the chat. And Paula connects with what you brought up around, you know, it's always important to make those relevant connections, right, for learners of any age, right, kids, adults, etc. And now when the school building itself, which incorporates a lot of elements of community just by being there and being a gathering place, right, when that building is closed, it becomes even more even more apparent, right, why we need to make sure we're showing up for kids. And so those relevant connections, making sure we're really tying kids in, you know, whether it be showing a Simpsons episode, you know, laughing together about, you know, a great story or something that happened, right? Like those are all really, really important, potentially more so than when kids have the ability to be in the same space. So we've got about 5 minutes left before we close out. Any other questions or ideas that you want to share with Chris?
Or with each other. I think we all want to.
Sure. Yeah.
I want to know what people are doing that I could be doing as well. And I'd love to at some point facilitate some kind of student choice, you know, down the road. Well, thank you for coming.
So wait time always sounds a little bit different, right, in a virtual space, doesn't it? So before we wrap up, One, Chris, I want to thank you for putting together a spectacular session.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
It was great. It was empowering, and provided people with a lot to think about. And thanks to all of you for being here. Before we wrap up, I'm going to post a few things in the chat. The first link for those of you who joined a few minutes into the session. This is our link to our PL on the Go sessions for this week. They get updated on a weekly basis. They're all no cost. And if any make sense to you and feel like they would help you continue to think about the work that you're doing, we'd love to welcome you there. And the direct links to attend them are shared right in that placemat as well. Another doc I'm going to share is just a feedback survey. So, if there are specific elements about Chris's session that you'd like to share out, things that you thought were really valuable and would be helpful, we always would love to hear. And then I'm also going to share a proposal form. One thing that was really kind of valuable is Chris had reached out to me directly, and I'll post my email in the chat too. Okay, if you are interested in putting together a session, know people who would be interested in creating a session, you or they can reach out to me to talk about aspects of our work that we want to share. There's also a link there to propose a session. There's something you've been working on that you think would be really valuable. By all means, please share. It's important that we get regional voices out there, and would love to hear from you. So, Chris, I'll turn it over to you for any final words, and I want to thank everybody for being here with us this morning.
Yeah, I think the only real finality here is that I think let's keep our heads up here every time we sign off of these synchronous learning meets and run a lesson, however we're doing it. Let's feel like we're actually doing more than we realize, and that's what's really important. And to just even on the way out, after every meet, students who are quiet will say thank you, and that says more than anything that we're providing them this. And I also want to point out too, if you are like me and co-teach with somebody, I've been blessed to have an active co-teacher from the special ed department for one of my classes. So I'm really work with your colleagues, reach out, and even if you don't have a co-teacher or teach the same course as somebody else, reach out and say, hey, what are you doing? What do you think? Because I think we all have a lot to bring to the table.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and we wish you a great rest of your Tuesday. See you later.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Coop.
Thank you. See you later.
Good work, Chris. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks a lot.